Again, part of our Yamhill Carlton series. One of the vineyards that I've had the pleasure of working with for pushing 15 years now is Gran Moraine Vineyard. And it was planted in as I say, about a decade and a half ago, three owners ago. That the vineyard has been thankfully managed by a single individual and his team. We'll introduce Ken Kupperman in just a second, but let's, as we do, go to the map to show you the Yamhill Carlton AVA, positioning the vineyards that we work with. And you can see out further west in the Coast Range, the Gran Moraine Vineyard, right on the western reaches of this crab-shaped American viticultural area called the Yamhill Carlton AVA. And so Gran Moraine Vineyard is meticulously managed and densely planted. Let's go to Ken now. He's been kind enough to meet us this morning in the vineyard. We lease both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir blocks from Jackson Family Wines, who are now the proud owners of Gran Moraine. But as I mentioned, Ken has been the common thread and a pleasure to work with. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. So, as Scott said, I've been with 3 different companies in the same vineyard, and I'm really happy that it has, one, that I have a job, and 2, that I have a job with someone I like to work with, Jackson Family. Barbara Banke and her family is, they're great. But with that said, it's been fun working with Scott and Annie, and anyway, I'll kind of tell you a little bit about the vineyard. They wanted me to also touch on some of the different things, but this is as Scott said, it was planted. This part that he gets, the Chardonnay, was planted in 2005, and back in those days, people thought that this area was too cool, too far into the coastal range, but we've never had any problem getting ripe. As a matter of fact, in one of the coolest vintages, 2011. I remember bringing one winemaker here, and we said this was the holy grail. This is the most beautiful fruit in the world, in a cool vintage. And other vintages that have been warmer, you can pick whenever you want and make the styles that you want. But it's been fun. It's been a lot of work. What to kind of say about the place? As I mentioned, it's marine sedimentary soils are the common soils in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. They're well drained. They're silty clay loams. Soils are one aspect, but it's really a systems approach, and it's the spacing of the vines, the distance between the rows, and the rootstocks. If we kind of go back in history and we think about Oregon, originally everything was planted on its own root, but then with phylloxera, the game changed. Along with that change, there's also been the climate. And with those things, when this vineyard was put in, it was put in with the concept of the most modern techniques at the time. People, when they originally planted in Oregon, planted in the beginning in like the Dundee Hills, which was Jory soils, deep soils, and you had a own rooted vine, which you didn't need irrigation. But irrigation's a contrary subject. However, it's a tool, and we have it here, and we measure the vine water status. And if we do need to irrigate, we would consider it, and we do. And it's a tool we look at to get right by photosynthesis and not by dehydration. And it's just a very limited amount when needed. But these soils are well drained, which is one of the trademarks of great wine making regions. And another part of like this region, why it's so good for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, is that we've got the latitude. And if you look at I've got a vest on, a few layers. It's still quite cool. We're not as California and some of the other regions. We're the same latitude as Burgundy, but we actually are even cooler than Burgundy over the season. So it really is a wonderful place, and we're dry during the growing season. We couldn't have a better place to grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And I'll mention that my first year here, I worked with Scott and Annie and their team, and I had like 25 or 30 winemakers, and it was kind of a blur. It was all new. It was 2007, and I'd had all the blocks picked, and then I looked up the hill here at Gran Moraine, and there was this block of Chardonnay that I'd forgotten because it was like 1 ton out there, and it had been raining. It was a difficult vintage, but it was a beautiful vintage. And I remember tasting that Chardonnay, and it was magical. It had this cinnamon note. The chemistries were 25 and a half, 3.25 pH, and like 0.6 or 7 acid. It was really balanced, and we ended up finding a home for that a little bit. But I'd grown a lot of Chardonnay in California. I'd worked for the Winty family, and they were wonderful, and it was a great experience. So, we had thousands of acres of Chardonnay, so I knew what Chardonnay is capable of, and there's no finer place.
And what do you think is unique about the climate or the microclimate, since you're nestled away there, really on the the eastern slopes of the Coast Range? Is there anything unique about the positioning of Gran Moraine and the climate?
As I mentioned earlier, at one point people thought it was too far into the coastal range to really to get ripe in our limited season in Oregon. But actually, right next door is Resonance Vineyard, which used to be owned by Kevin Chambers. Now it's by the Jadot family, and Bill Hill, who was part of the team that developed this vineyard. He loved the wines from Resonance and knew that they could be good. But it is different than some of the other AVAs in that it's not as warm as the Dundee Hills, and it's not as cool as the Eola Amity. So it's somewhere in between those two. We do get influence from the Van Duzer corridor, which is not that far away, plus also some of the valleys that come through the coastal range. So it gets the cooling effect of the ocean, but it's also at the aspects which are south and eastern facing slopes. It's kind of an optimal microclimate.
Yeah, agreed. It's Goldilocks, just right. Lastly, what about your philosophy, your cultural practices? Maybe you can show us a little bit about just how densely that vineyard is planted and some of the things you do as your commitment toward soil and vine nutrition and sustainability.
Okay, and I'm going to just really quickly point in on where we're at in the season.
Yeah.
We're just right now at like what they call woolly bud, where the buds are kind of look like cotton. And in Oregon, they always say nothing really happens in the vineyard until bloom. And I want to kind of mention two things. Is 2016, which was our warmest vintage, bloom was June 6th. Our coolest vintage, 2011, was July 11th, almost a 6-week window. So Oregon, like I said, it's a shorter season, condensed season, but we have long days in the summer. But what's really important is we manage our crop load, and we manage all of our canopy. So there's a dozen or more hand passes that take place, from pruning, shoot positioning, and making sure that all the shoots are in proper alignment for photosynthesis. And then we open up the canopy a little bit for dappled light with some moderate leaf and lateral pulling in the fruit zone on the morning sun side. But one of the biggest impacts is that I believe in viticulture is crop load. And so we look at our season, as I mentioned. If we have an early season, we might be able to put a little bit more fruit on. But if we have a late season like 2010 and 11, we have to drop even more fruit, and we may need to have even more multiple passes. But in general, we probably drop half of our fruit every year in order to get the right balance. So it's not like it makes itself. We have to make the balance, and it takes multiple passes. And I'm lucky that I work with a really wonderful team of people, and some days it's fun. Some days it's just work, and that's okay too.
That's data-rich viticulture. Well, we love getting the fruit, and I want to turn now to Shannon and get some of her perspectives on working with Chardonnay from Gran Moraine Vineyard, how it presents itself to you. What are some of the interesting approaches?
Yeah, so the Chardonnay coming from Gran Moraine has been a real fun experience for us in that, you know, we go out to the vineyard and we see these pristine, I mean, it's literally like highly manicured, one cluster per shoot. But one of the things we noticed early on, the block that we get our Chardonnay from is up on a hill, and we'll see on the hillside this nice dappled brown coloring where we know it's getting in the sweet spot, it's ready to come on. But on the bottom of the hill, we'll see a little bit less of that characteristic. And so what we've started doing in the winery is we have the ability to do several press loads, and the fruit that's coming more from the less, the skins are more green, we'll do an approach where we do less oxygen. So we'll do fewer turns on our press. We'll be adding sulfur right to the press pan and trying to get as little oxygen uptake as possible. Whereas the stuff that has more of that dappled brown, and actually in vineyard readings can be as much as 1 brick difference from the stuff at the bottom of the hill, we will do foot trotting on it to actually get a little bit more of the skin characteristics from it, but also it's what's called black Chardonnay. So our goal is not to do any sulfur adds to it and to basically brown out any characteristics in the tank before racking to barrel for barrel fermentation. So we've been learning and playing around with this technique as well as our barrels. We originally only had 1 large format barrel that we used, which was a puncheon. And slowly we have started using some what are called cigar barrels, which they're a little bit longer in length. And so what's happening with these cigar barrels is we're getting less of the new oak characteristic when we use them, but we're also getting more of the leaves contact. That's actually the cells from the yeast. And what we find is that helps limit how much oxygen that's coming into the Chardonnay, which is really important later on, but also it gives us more body and texture when we do stirring on them. What I also find on the Chardonnay is a lot of really beautiful lemon curd characteristic and nice bright citrus fruit. So it's been a real fun vineyard to play around with and to learn and improve our Chardonnay winemaking style.
Yeah, it's so much fun to taste through all these experimental components and then work with you, Shannon, putting the final blend together for our Gran Moraine Vineyard Designated Chardonnay. As Ken mentioned, we also lease a Pinot Noir block and make a Gran Moraine Vineyard Designated Pinot. But I think the focus today for this 3-pack, Annie, is the Chardonnay.
Yeah, so the Chardonnay is the 3rd of the 3 bottles that make up the Yamhill Carlton AVA virtual tour pack for this edition. And as mentioned before, the Yamhill Carlton AVA is also represented by the Golden Eagle feather. So the Chardonnay, the Goodrich, and the Atticus all have this same raptor feather on them. So look at the website and be sure and take advantage of this while we are all taking time to be at home and be safe. It's $99 for the 3-pack to your door, which is an amazing deal, and it won't last long. So hopefully that will be something that will encourage you. And we hope you have enjoyed these educational chats with folks from Yamhill Carlton.
Ken, always a pleasure. Thanks for making a trip out to the vineyard with us this morning.
Thank you both. You guys take care and see you one day.
See you soon. Ciao.
Take care. Bye.